you know, we could talk about, you know, Russia, Ukraine for 40 minutes, and then we can move to Israel. But
Yeah,
what do you think about the this Putin's speech yesterday?
it's certainly interesting, a lot of the things that he's saying, and I don't know, from my perspective, it really shows that this is going to be a long war, because the West is not going to give up aiding Ukraine, and it seems like he wants to escalate this. Just for the people who are unfamiliar, I tend to start my meetings at 7 past the hour to make sure that people who are running a little late can also come. So don't so yeah, during this period we just sort of talk a little bit. I Yeah. Um, what I think is really going to be interesting to see is whether or not Russia as a functional entity really survives this, or whether Putin survives this, because it's going to be a huge question about the Russia that he's created. And the other issue is that he has survived for most of his tenure from 2000 onwards on the supposition that most Russians are going to let him be the leader of their politics, right? They're not going to really think about it. There's maybe 10 to 15% that are liberal. There's about 10 to 15% that are ultra nationalist. And then that the majority of people are just sort of disconnected from politics. They just don't take a political opinion. And as long as they do that, the sort of agreement is that Putin won't involve them in his political decisions. But if he goes through some kind of large scale draft, or Russia really suffers economically because of the sanctions, it's going to change the rules of that game. And already Russia's becoming more totalitarian than it was. So it'll be interesting and sad to see whether people actually push back on that bargain not being met.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. A lot of the people, I mean, I know from talking to people who went to Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Georgia, but some of them are coming back. That was just to me, and it's, you know, all these bloggers that are no longer can make any money off YouTube or Instagram, and they're like, you know what, we'll just come back and we'll figure this thing out. And and now you close the borders, so they can't leave anymore. It's pretty tight checkpoint. He said in his speech, "We let everybody go, whatever happens," but it's not true anymore.
Right.
They don't let people go anymore. They're stuck.
I mean, he really can't. I mean, this is literally Russia's smallest generation. Uh, it's because nobody had kids in the 1990s, right? That's If you're being drafted for military service now, you're between what, 18 and 25. That means you were born between 1988 and 1993, which was literally the worst time to be in Russia. The entire country was falling apart. Nobody believed there was any hope for the future. And you just can't manufacture 18 to 20, 21 year olds. They take, that many years to grow. So um, I think that Russia really doesn't have the option of allowing people to stay on shore. They don't have the option of letting people leave, because if they lose that population, then they can't draft them. And yeah, I really don't see any any long-term future for people who want to get out of the country.
Also, I wanted to ask you. I was just talking to Paul and Paul Tannenbaum, trying to help me with the Mesopotamia citizens presentation, and this Utu. He said he's a little busy right now, but do you know any Assyriologists or who is interested in Assyriology? uh,
Um, I'm not well connected to the Syria. Yeah, I mean, like, there's a difference between modern Assyrians, and Assyriologists, in
yeah,
that it's a very different sort of life and study. A lot of Assyrians today don't really, I mean, they see those as their ancestors, but they don't really study it in sort of a formulaic sense. So I don't know. Um, yeah, I don't know who to put you in touch with, unfortunately.
yeah. Or just trying to do this series of how people lived 3,000, 2,000 years ago: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Sumeria, Babylon, Assyria, Nineveh, and we don't have that many records to begin with.
Right. I
But
was going to say most of what we know from the upper classes, right, and the rulers and they talked about what they did, and we also have to sort of take with a grain of salt everything that we hear said in the Mesopotamian context, primarily because in the Mesopotamian context, people weren't interested in recording history as a genuine reflection of what happened, but rather as a propaganda experiment, right? Assyrians would talk about what they did, not from an interest in genuine historical reflection like we see from modern history, but from the sense of, look at what we did, we'll do that to you too. Don't resist us. Or look at what we did, we're so powerful, nobody can stop us. So their desire for fidelity wasn't there. All right, there are two really interesting questions here already. I'm definitely going to address those in the after 2 hours, because there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't really fit, and I think deserves enough time for its explanation. Somebody says that they're looking fair and balanced. I try fair and balanced. That's hopefully what you take away from it. But fair and balanced for some people looks a little different than for others. So I hope that my fair and balanced, in that trying to portray Israel as a state like any other state, with positive motives, negative motives, conflicts, internal issues, and everything else, that comes off, right? I don't treat Israel as a pariah state. I also don't treat Israel as a golden boy. So if that's fair and balanced, hopefully I fit that. The two interesting questions that I will put to later are questions about Herzl's thought process, and what differentiates Hasidic Jews from Orthodox Jews. There's another question here about Yitzhak Rabin. I do have a slide about him, so we're definitely going to talk about that. And there's a question about coalition politics. We're definitely going to discuss that in the historical context. But I think if we want to talk genuinely about how that works, I'm going to address that at the end of the 2 hours in the Q&A, because I think that also deserves a much more complicated explanation. All right, and I think we are honestly at the time to begin, so I'm going to start it up.